I sure have enjoyed being here, and I surely did enjoy being at your place too. I was here last year. In November of this year, I was taking my dog for a walk, and my heart just began racing. I'd had it happen before, but never like this. And so I said to the dog, and we'd just gone a little ways, and I said, I've got to go back. I turned around and she trotted along behind me. And it's funny, she'll go off and do her own thing, but if she senses that I'm not feeling well, she stays right at my heels, or wherever I am. I went in, called my neighbor who was a nurse, and told her I wasn't feeling well. I was going to call the doctor, and if he thought I needed to go to the emergency room, could she take me? She said, I'll be right there. I called the doctor, told him the speed that my pulse was going, and he says, get to the hospital as quick as you can. He said, if nobody's there that can take you, call 911. So my neighbor was there very shortly. She's a nurse, and we went to Park Ridge at Hendersonville. I mean, it's at Fletcher Academy. And I got there, and she went to park the car, and I went on. She said, go right to the desk. And she asked me why I was there. There was quite a few people in the room, so I figured I'd have a wait. And she asked me why, and I told her. And she said, well, what was your pulse? I told her. And they came out with a wheelchair and took me right in. They put me right on the table in the emergency room and started painting all the little stickers on you know, all about it. And as soon as they got them on, my neighbor sat down beside me on the stretcher thing. And I said, it's awful cloudy out there. I said, I wonder if it's going to rain. She said, it doesn't look cloudy to me. And I said, well, it's kind of dark. And I said, it's getting darker. She said, really? I said, yeah. And then I said, now it's all dark. And she took my pulse and got up and went to speak to the doctor. I don't know if they hadn't turned the thing on after they got me hooked up or just did it when she said that. But the last thing I heard, I could tell my heart had stopped. But I didn't say anything. I was just talking with the Lord and thanking Him for the good life He'd given me, the happy family I had, and all these blessings. And the last thing I heard was somebody said code. And the doctor said, and I heard him say, we can't. She has assigned you down to resuscitate. But you know, it wasn't very long before I began to wake up. And finally, I hated to open my eyes. I didn't want to see for sure where I was. But I opened my eyes and I was still where I had come. Anyway, pretty soon one of the doctors came over. I didn't know him. He was the emergency room doctor, but he had a little notepad in his hand and a pen, and he said, I want you to tell me everything you saw and felt. And I said, I didn't feel anything, and I didn't expect to. Anyway, he says, well, did you see any bright light? Did you? No, I went to sleep. And after a while, when they got one of the what did they call it, telemetry room, and I can't think of what they said. Anyway, the room where they have all the stuff to keep track of it. When they got a room ready, they took me up there. And I never had so much good attention in my life. I mean, they took care of me so good that night. And oh, before I left the emergency room, they brought me the flatline tape for it to look at. And it had a kind of a weak little lip on the first end, and then it went along like that, as flat as could be. That bug's going to bite me. Anyway, and that night, every once in a while, they would take a strip, and one of the doctors, I said, let me look at one of those strips, and he brought it in. And so it would only flatline for about that far instead of all the way across, and then there'd be a few little things, and it'd go like that. The next day, the doctor came in, the surgeon, and he said, what day do you want your pacemaker put in, tomorrow or Friday? This was Wednesday morning then. And I said, tomorrow, then I can go home Friday. And so that's what they did. And I have been like a new person almost since I had that pacemaker in. It has just done so much good. Only one time, I don't know if I have time to say this or not, but I'll try to say it quick. One time just before Christmas, this was in November that this happened, and I was getting ready for my family to come for Christmas. My son from Michigan was already on the way because he called in that morning telling me he was on the way. He tried to be there at supper time. And I started making some soups that I knew he'd like for supper, and I began to have this, and I hadn't had any racing since I'd had the pacemaker in. And I started again. And I went and took my blood pressure. And it was higher than it was the time before when they rushed me in. And my first thought was, well, you've got to call and go back to the hospital. And I said, if I do, I'll be in the hospital. When my son gets here, the kids are all coming in. And I said, I just began to pray. And I said to the Lord, I said, I know if you want me here, you can take care of it. You already did. And so I just kept on fixing the soup and the cooking and what I was going to have for supper. And finally it got so bad, I said, I've got to go lie down or I'm going to fall down. So I went into the bedroom and thought I was going to kneel by the bed to pray. The next thing I knew, I woke up and I was on the floor. And I crawled up onto the bed, and I laid there, and I realized my heart was not racing. And I rested a little while, and I got up and finished what I was doing. And the kids came, and we had a pleasant Christmas. And it's been operating all right since. So I just thank the Lord for His blessing. Amen.